Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Madison, and the focus is National Catalyst for Change. The year is 1786, and the United States, a new country, not doing very well. In fact, under this construct called the Articles of Confederation, the states were operating pretty independently and not very responsive to this national government. They were in their own spheres in terms of trade and taxes and even printing their own money, a lot more conflict than harmony, and it was somewhat of a desperate state for people like Madison, who's serving in the Confederation Congress, who said at the time, our situation is becoming every day more and more critical. No money comes into the federal treasury, no respect is paid to federal authority, and people of reflection unanimously agree that the existing Confederacy is tattering to its foundation. He is more than worried about whether or not this United States as a single country was even going to be viable, certainly under the existing construct of government, under the Articles of Confederation, and that construct was a single unicameral legislature with no separate executive, no separate judiciary, each state with one vote, and it was intentionally weak, in part because the founders feared kingly despotism. They didn't want to have something with a strong executive like King George has in England. They wanted to have something that celebrated the sovereignty and liberty of individual states and individual people, but it wasn't working very well. So Madison was part of a small group that called for a convention of all the states to come together to try to fix the problems. They called it a meeting of commissioners to remedy defects of the federal government, focused principally on economic issues, and they were all going to get together in Annapolis, Maryland, kind of centrally located. The problem is only 12 people showed up, and they only represented 5 states. So this conference was a complete bust. They got nothing done, only to further their unified view that something had to take place, if not then soon. And so they put out another call for another convention, and they wanted everybody to come to Philadelphia the following May to revise the Articles of Confederation to meet these national needs. The question was who was going to show up. Not many showed up in Annapolis. Why would Philadelphia the next year be any different? Well, there were really 2 catalysts to help Madison and his colleagues get 12 out of 13 states actually to show up for the Constitutional Convention the following year. The first was a rebellion in the state of Massachusetts. It was called Sheas Rebellion. And former Revolutionary War soldier Daniel Shays was one of the many farmers in western Massachusetts who were really upset, along with a lot of the other veterans from the war, about the onerous taxes that they were really withering under. They were losing their homes, they were losing their farms, they decided to rebel. And all of a sudden, there was nothing the national government really could do about it. And this scared a lot of people. Eventually, the Massachusetts government pulled together a militia, suppressed the rebellion, and it went away. But the other states were paying attention. If it happened in Massachusetts, it could happen to us. And this government, this national government, simply impotent, had no characteristics that could really suppress this kind of rebellion. And that caused concern, which motivated some to show up at the Constitutional Convention. The other catalyst was one man, George Washington, the hero of the war, General Washington, who led his troops to victory over Britain, most respected man in all of the colonies. If he would go, then maybe others would follow. The problem was Washington was very circumspect about this. His reputation was at an all-time high. If he goes to this convention and it doesn't go well, it would perhaps sour that reputation. He could only sort of go down. But Washington was also very concerned about the state of the nation. He was concerned about Sheas Rebellion. And there were people like James Madison who were pushing and pushing and pushing Washington to attend. Madison and Washington had gotten to know each other back in 1781. After the victory at Yorktown, Washington spent about 4 months in the capital of Philadelphia, where Madison was serving in Congress. And they actually spent quite a bit of time together and grew to both like and respect each other. So Madison got pretty bold. He wrote letters to Washington. He visited Mount Vernon. He was encouraging Washington to attend the Constitutional Convention. And eventually Washington said, okay. Now, Madison was probably the most prepared, having studied governments and politics, his own experience, but also in other countries over the centuries. So he was very prepared, but he also was prepared to do something that maybe others were not initially thinking. not just to amend the Articles of Confederation, but to really completely rewrite them. And to sort of motivate people into this thinking, he issued a treatise in April of 1787, just 1 month before the Constitutional Convention, that was a pure attack on the Articles of Confederation. He called it the Vices of the Political System of the United States. And he listed 12 vices attacking the weaknesses of the current federal structure, as well as issues with the states. Just like the first 4 vices are listed here: the failure of the states to comply with the constitutional requisitions, encroachments by the states on the federal authority, violation of the law of nations and of treaties, trespasses of the states and on the rights of each other, and he went on and he went on. In fact, in vice number 7, he specifically focused on the lack of the ability for the federal government to have sanctions if the states were not following those laws, and a need for the federal government to have such power. He described the current construct as under the form of such a constitution, i.e. the Articles. It is in fact nothing more than a treaty of amity and commerce and of alliance between so many independent and sovereign states. This was not a path to success, something that Madison desperately believed needed to be fixed. In his vices, Madison also turned on that political scientist nature of himself, and he wrote a concept called the enlargement of the sphere. He first introduces it here in his vices as a means for a republic to protect against factions, parties, and to secure minority rights. These were all of very great interest to Madison, and he wrote, "Because a common interest or passion is less apt to be felt and the requisite combinations less easy to be formed by a great than a small number, the society becomes broken into a greater variety of interests or pursuits of passions which check each other." This concept would reappear for Madison much more prominently in the Federalist Papers that would come out after the Constitution, but its first appearance actually showed up here in his document on the vices. So Madison, heading into the Constitutional Convention, had clearly identified the problems. He was pushing for big change, and now it was time to deliver on those solutions. But that's the story for another day. That is James Madison and the National Catalyst for Change, from the life of James Madison. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.